Hi, I'm Ralph Dutcher. My call sign is KD2BDZ, and I'll talk to you for a few minutes about how amateur radio and local health departments can work together. I work full-time at the Monroe County Department of Public Health, and we've found over the years that there's a good reason to have a partnership with our local amateur radio group. Does this picture look familiar to you? Look at all the variables on that screen. These are concerns that we have in public health on a day-to-day basis. Everything from special populations to being concerned about preparedness, and then, oh, by the way, they'll throw in communications on top of us. We have what's called a deliverable in our county, and we've used the amateur radio folks to work with that deliverable. Specific deliverable requirements that we have for our pod sites are alternative redundant communication services, and that applies to all hazards and public health emergencies we're dealing with. We have a potential MCM distribution for up to 36 different pod sites, and even more than that when you consider the closed pod sites we have. Few demographics of Monroe County. Our population's around 745,000 now, about 1,300 square miles, and there's 17 different communities that we have to deal with in that county. So you can see we've got a fairly sizable problem. In order to solve this specific deliverable requirement question, we reached out to our local amateur radio group. The Monroe County Amateur Radio Group, which is called Monroe County ARES and RACES. Those folks are the ones that came to help us out in a very reliable fashion. The ARES RACES Club can bring to our problem a very organized way of dealing with communications issues. They have licensed by the FCC, they're part of the American Radio Relay League, and the interesting thing is they come self-equipped. They bring all their radios with them, and they're ready and ready to serve, and they also conduct regularly net operations just to make sure that they're practiced up and know what they're doing. They do this by using basic ham radio equipment, a 12 meter or a 440 voice comms, and they're using it on a voice repeater network. Sometimes it's simplex, sometimes it's point to point. We also have some advanced capabilities in the technology area, things like amateur television where they can actually produce a live image across the systems. We can use PSK31, which is a way you can send files of data quickly, like a spreadsheet or maybe even a long document without having to key it in letter by letter. And then also the folks at this club are familiar with something called APRS, Advanced Position Radio Service. And that ends up with a GPS-like quality for different municipal entities and actually figuring out where people are on the map. So I think you can see that amateur radio brings a lot of interesting technology to our situation. The Office of Public Health Preparedness in our county went so far as to install UHF and VHF antennas at all the prepositioned pod locations. That's a sizable investment for us, and we collaborated with our public safety communications for that equipment. We also encourage any volunteers to come and work with our pod operations, so we provide training for them. The ARES RACES Club brings to the table the fact that they're self-equipped and they're trained in their operations. They're very eager and willing and ready to serve, and they are definitely a public service civic participation group. They work quite frequently in other public service activities, so they're familiar with how to work with one another, and they're comfortable with their technology. So what we did is set up 3 different full-scale exercises. We used the Homeland Security exercise and evaluation program to make sure that the exercises were compliant and that we could readily demonstrate and test the concepts that we wanted to do with our communications. The volunteer ARES RACES staff worked with these 3 different situations to provide emergency redundant communications. Basically, they could provide a battery-operated system that was not dependent upon any outside plug-in source. So that satisfied our deliverable requirement of having a redundant secondary communication system. We did these for 3 different times, and we have full AARs available if people are interested in looking at those. So when we did this, prior to the exercise, as I said, we had the UHF and VHF antennas installed and were tested just to facilitate the communications. We also mentioned to the locations they could use those for any all-hazard type of problem they came into. At the time of the exercise, the Aries Races volunteers agreed to travel to the pod sites, actually locate the antenna wire, and establish a network back to our communications center at the EOC, W2 EOC, as it's designated in our county. We were very successful with this, and everybody that participated thought it was a worthwhile exercise. So how could you replicate this in your county? I'd suggest first off what you should do is visit your amateur radio operators in the area. If you need to find out where they are, just Google ARRL and look for the clubs that might be in your particular geographic area. I would suggest also very strongly that you go to the field days operations that occur in the end of June. That way you would get to see amateur radio operators from Aries or Races working in the field, basically outdoors, on a 24-hour basis where they try and contact different places around the country. You could actually see them, and I'm sure they'd let you work their radios if you'd like to try and do that. If there's no Aries or Races in your area, I'd suggest you look at MARS, Military Area Record Services, Saturn, which is from the Salvation Army, or even working with possibly your CERT team, your Community Emergency Response Team, or MRC organizations, as they may also be a source of ham operators. I'd suggest finding an organization. That would be a simpler way than having to go out and find individuals. At that point, why don't you go ahead and establish an MOU or at least a written document in your planning documents to organize yourself with these local voluntary organizations, and then of course practice operations with these formal exercises, or maybe even work on their weekly nets that they have, where they have a network set up on the basis of just voluntary operations. So here's the end of the story. When all else fails, there's amateur radio. My call sign and my email is on the screen right now. It's simply kd2bdz@arrl.net. Or if you want to look at the Monroe County Aries Races website, that's www.monroecounty.mcom, that's all one word, and that's a .org site. Remember, when all else fails, there's amateur radio. This is Ralph, KD2BDZ, and I'm clear. Over.